Hey, what's up everybody? I'm on Nards here, and today I'm going to make a tutorial on how to make this morph effect in Cinema 4D. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to be creating. Alright, so you can see it's a very cool effect, a bit similar to like the Transformers style effect, except it kind of starts out in this like sphere and expands, and in my opinion looks pretty sick. I'm still going to be giving this out as a template when this video gets 150 likes, but I thought might as well make a tutorial also for those of you who want to know basically how you can make this without using the template. So do me a favor right now, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys like the tutorial, because I'll definitely make more tutorials if I get a lot of feedback on them and stuff. So I really appreciate that. And alright, let's get started. So we're going to go into Cinema 4D, and we're just going to center the camera view. And let's just add a camera so we can have it locked on this position. But before we do that, let's just check how long we want to make this. You can see this animation lasts 8 seconds, and at 30 frames per second, that's 240 frames. So right here, we're going to type in 240 on the timeline. So now we have an 8-second long animation, and just drag this out. So now let's add our camera. Just going to click on this and load in a camera. And we're going to click this black box so it turns white. And just put a keyframe at the beginning and end of the timeline. This is just going to have our camera position locked on at a straight on view. So before we get any further, let's quickly do the render settings. So we're going to click here to edit the render settings. The output, I'm going to use 1920 by 1080. You guys can use 1280 by 720 if you want, to your choice. For frame range, I'm going to do all frames. For the save, I'm going to do alpha channel and format QuickTime Movie. And I have a few adjustments that I did in Adobe After Effects, and I'll tell you what those are right now because it's not worth making a tutorial. Basically, one thing that actually makes a big difference on this effect and makes it look a lot better, I don't know what's going on with the mouse right now, but I added a Real Smart Motion Blur to the whole thing, and I did mess around with the settings. So if you have Real Smart Motion Blur, definitely worth buying. But if you do have it, just drag it onto this layer when you're in Adobe After Effects, and it definitely makes it look a lot more realistic and makes the motion look a lot smoother. And I also added a few different glows, and you guys can just mess around with the settings. And finally, I added some lens flares in the background, which is just pretty simple. So nothing really amazing going on in Adobe After Effects. Basically just a motion blur and a glow effect and some lens flares. But let's get back to the tutorial. So let's just save it and give it a name. I called it Morph. You guys can use whatever you want. Can keep this at geometry. Gonna put the ray depth at 6, reflection depth at 2, and shadow depth at 6 under the options. And on this intro, we're actually not going to use ambient occlusion, which is pretty rare for me. But I actually have some snapshots on my desktop because I wanted to test out what the difference is. And the first one is with ambient occlusion. The one on the right is with ambient occlusion, and the one on the left is without ambient occlusion. So you can see there's barely a difference, and I found that with ambient occlusion the render time was like twice as long, I think. So we're just going to add global illumination, so we're going to click Effect and Global Illumination, and we're going to put these, the stochastic samples at low, and the record density at low, the smoothing at at weak, and the oversampling at minimal. And that's about it for render settings, so we're good to go with the intro. So first of all, we're going to add our text. So we're going to go to Mode Graph, Text Object. We're going to click a line and align it to the middle. And I'm going to write something like, let's see, Morph. Why not just Morph? Pretty simple, right? And for the font, I'm going to go to Typograph Pro. I'm going to use Ultra Light. And what's great about this font is you can see this is really thin, and it allows us to make really beveled caps. I'll show you what I mean. So if we add caps, can see it looks like a really cool effect. I was inspired by kind of a Harry Potter text, but if we look closely, yeah, you can see we have this really nice beveled text, and you don't need to use a font like that. In case you don't have it, it will still work with anything else, but I thought this was just a nice touch. Let's see. Helvetica Ultralight might work. Let me see. Helvetica New, Ultralight. That looks okay too. It's not quite as light, so I'm going to roll with the other one, but you guys can use it if you want. Doesn't really matter. I'm sure you guys should have Helvetica New. So I'm just going to roll with Typograph Pro, Ultralight, which is a great font. Also guys, I was considering doing a video all about showing you all my fonts and recommended fonts and how to get fonts and everything. Just a video about fonts. If you guys like that, let me know in the comments. Alright, so we got our basic text. Let's make the caps, I don't know, 6 or 7. I'm just going to roll with 6. That's looking okay. And now let's add our texture. So the texture was pretty easy to make. First of all, I looked for a grunge texture on my Finder. You guys can find that on Google Images, or you can use my texture pack. So I'm just going to look up grunge texture. Look through these. I'm going to try, let's see how this looks. I'm going to go with this kind of nice cracked one right here. I'm going to drag it into Cinema 4D, this area right here. And if we go back to Cinema 4D, this box is going to come up. You just want to click No. So now we have our cool little texture. So first of all, we're going to add a reflection. And we're just going to put the brightness at 20%. And now to have our texture look more realistic and grungy, we're going to add a bump map, and we're going to go to texture, and we're going to go to noise, and we're going to double click to go into the noise. And if we open this up a little bigger, click this little arrow right here, you can see we have the nice previews, and there's a lot of different good textures. I'm just going to look through these real quick. Try to find one that's good. I'm going to put the strength at 120%. So I'm basically just trying to find a nice looking noise texture. I think I'm going to roll with this blistered turbulence. And I'm going to decrease the strength, something like 40 actually, or maybe 50. You guys just have to experiment with the settings and go with something that works well for you. You don't have to use these exact settings, it's really up to you guys. Now let's go to the specular. We're going to put the width at 65%, height at 40%, and the fall off at 25%. So that's looking pretty cool. Let's drag this onto the text, and we're going to change the projection to cubic, and we're going to check off seamless. And real quick, we're going to uncheck global illumination because we don't have any light sources, so it won't render correctly. We're just going to render it without global illumination and see how it looks. Alright, so I guess not a bad looking texture. To be honest with you guys, we're not going to be able to get the lighting and the texturing perfect because that actually took hours. But if you want to get the exact settings, you can download the template once it gets 150 likes and check out exactly how I made the texture. But for now, we're just going to go with something like this. So now let's add some light sources. So I actually have 3 light sources positioned in different ways. And they're not lights, they're actually planes, which if you guys know me, I use planes, not softboxes, not lights, to light my scenes. So we're going to type in 1000 and 1000 for the width and the height. Just going to drag this up so it's almost out of camera, and we're going to drag this so the left side of it, it's going to decrease the width a little bit, but so the left side of this plane is about in the middle of the text, so it looks like something like this. And this is going to light up the top edge and make it look like the light's coming from the right, which it is. Now let's give this a material. I'm going to double click, add a new material, double click to edit it. We're just going to check off luminance and type in 500. And let's drag this onto the plane. And let's render this out and see how it's looking. Alright, so as you can see, it's actually looking a lot better. You have these full white highlights on the text, and it's really making the texture come alive. I'm actually going to decrease the reflection to something like 12% and decrease the bump to 40%. But it's all about tweaking the settings and making it look good. So with this plane, we're gonna right click Cinema 4D tags, and we're gonna click compositing, and we're gonna uncheck scene by camera. So this isn't seen when it renders, so you don't have this little white stripe. And let's render again. You can see it's looking a little bit better with the small adjustments I made, and we don't see the light anymore. So we could stop here, but I actually decided to do a few subtle planes just to make this look a little bit better. But as you can see, the lighting as it is looking pretty good. So we're going to add another plane. We're going to click here, and we're going to do plane. We're going to change the orientation to X. Just going to drag this a little bit out of the way. And we're going to type in 800 by 800 for the width and height. Or maybe 600 by 600. Just going to drag this to the right a little bit more. So we just want basically a plane that's a little bit to the right of the text. I'm going to make a new material for this plane. I'm going to select it. For the luminance, we're going to type in 200%. And we're going to change the color to a slight blue tint. Like that. And we're just going to drag this onto the plane. And now we're just going to control drag on this plane, basically copy and paste it. We're going to change the orientation to Z. Now, Y. And we're going to move it down. And we are going to center it. We're going to put the width and height at 800. So this is basically how we want our light setup to look. One plane kind of coming from the top right with 500 luminance. One plane just coming from the right with 200% luminance and a slight blue tint. And one plane coming from the bottom with 200 luminance and a slight blue tint. And this is going to have the same material as this one because we copy and pasted it. And now let's control drag or copy and paste this compositing tag to all the planes so none of them are seen by camera. And now let's render this again and see how it looks. Alright, so to be honest with you guys, it actually probably looked better before, but we still want to have these highlights, but we just don't want quite as much of them. So we're going to decrease the luminance of all these materials. So I think the first one, we're going to put this at 400. And the second one, let's try 100. And let's render this again and see how it looks. We might not even want these two planes at all. All I can say is it worked. That's what I used in the actual template, but it might be different because I'm using a different material. So that's all what it's about, playing around with the settings and not stopping until it looks perfect. So that's looking okay, but honestly I think it looked better without these two planes. So it was a little bit of a waste, but I'm just going to delete them and delete that material and put this back up to 500. But that's what it's all about, trying stuff, and if it doesn't work, just going back to what you had before. So I think this looked a lot better. A lot more contrast, a lot brighter highlights. Yeah, so that's looking pretty good. So let's make the text actually. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Make the height maybe it's something like 80, maybe 100. It's looking pretty good. And just to make it proportional, I'm going to decrease the caps again. Alright, so basically we created our text and we created our lighting, but now we have to create this whole animation, which is what makes this special. How it shakes and kind of, I don't know the word for it, basically it just shakes almost like it's a liquid and then expands, and it looks very cool. So that's what this main tutorial is about, how to create that. So we're going to be using explosion effects. So we're going to click here and do explosion effects. And we're going to select the text object and the explosion effects. Hold shift to select them both. And we're going to press Alt G to put them into a null object. And now you can see the explosion effects is applied to the text object. But we're going to have to do a lot of different settings to make it look good. Obviously it looks pretty bad right now. First of all, we're going to put the strength at 0%, which is basically going to make it so that the pieces, wrong thing. It's basically going to make it so that the pieces stay together and don't actually explode. We are going to put the blast range at 400, or whatever the width of your text is actually. And for the time, we're actually going to animate this. What we want to do is we want to go to the gravity and we want to put the direction at none, so it doesn't have any gravity, so it's not falling down, unless you like that effect, which you could have it. I'm going to put the speed of the rotation at 60, which is just going to rotate all these pieces, which actually makes a pretty significant difference. Let's get a quick render of this, see how it looks. Speaking of rendering, what's great about this template, it only takes 2 hours to render, which I think is pretty good for such a complicated thing, and that's because there's no aim and occlusion. I guess 2 hours could still be a lot of time for some of you people, but compared to my other templates, some of them take like 10 hours to render or more. Alright, so yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Not quite what we want yet. See what else we can do with this to make it look a little better. So yeah, we're gonna wanna animate the time, and you can see what that does. So we're gonna start at frame 0 and we're gonna type in 30% for the time, and we're gonna click this little control click on that little dot so it turns red, and that's gonna put a keyframe at frame 0. It's just gonna say that at frame 0 we want this to be 30%. Then we are going to go down to frame 60. I'm going to type in 25%, which is just basically going to make it look like it is moving before it forms the text, so it's not just staying still. And then we're going to go to frame 80 and we're going to type in 0, and this is where it's going to finish up. But it actually finishes up a little bit before this. You can see it finishes up like right here. If we play our animation, see that's looking okay. Let's render it like this. You can see we're getting this weird edge right here, which we don't want, so let's mess around with the thickness under cluster. You can see once we put this at 0, that weird effect goes away. So let's put the thickness at 10, and at 120 we're going to set a keyframe, so we're going to control click that little dot next to the thickness, and then maybe 160. I type in 0. Let's see how that works. Let's move this keyframe, or yeah, this keyframe thing at 120, move it to 140. That's looking pretty good. And move this a little bit closer. It's all about tweaking it so it looks perfect. So let's watch this again. Alright, so that's looking not bad. Now what we're going to want to do is animate the horizontal spacing under the text object. So we're going to start out just going to mess around with the value until it becomes a sphere. So that's going to be different depending on the font, the height of your text, and also how many letters you have. But for me, something, let's see, around 70, around -70. So I'm going to go with that. You can see now we just basically have a ball. And wherever the explosion effects starts animating in, that's when we're going to animate the horizontal spacing. And that looks like it starts around 60. So we're going to go back to the text object, and for the horizontal spacing, we're going to control click to set a keyframe at frame 60, and I'm using the value -70, but that's going to vary based on your font size and how many letters you have. So then we're going to go to 180, and we're going to put the horizontal spacing at 0 and control click for a keyframe. So now let's watch our animation. So that's actually that's looking pretty good. Let's get a quick render of it to see how it's looking. Alright, so that's actually looking pretty cool. We're almost done with this effect. A few things we want to change. We're going to want to go to the explosion effects, and we're going to go to cluster, and we're going to want to change the cluster type from automatic. We're going to put it on polygons. It's going to give it a completely different look. This is really your own preference, but I think this looks a lot better for the effect, and this is what I used. So let's get another quick render. So that's looking pretty cool. I have to say it did look a little bit better in the example, but that's really probably based on what I typed in. Some letters work better than other letters. It was just look that Epic Text works pretty good like this, but nonetheless it's still looking pretty good. And this is without all the motion blur, glow effect, color correction, and lens flares that I added in Adobe After Effects. So considering that, it actually looks pretty cool. Let's just play the animation one more time. But we aren't quite done yet. There's one more thing we gotta add. So that's looking nice, but we still gotta add the buckle effect that makes this whole thing shake as if it's kind of a liquid that you see at the beginning, like the first 2 seconds of this animation. So we're gonna go to the deformers right here, and we're gonna click on formula. And we're going to drag that into the null object with the explosion effects and the text object. And if we drag through this, you can see, very cool, it shakes the whole thing, making it look like a liquid. Now, you don't have to put it on Y radial, you can also put it on something like X radial. This gives it a different kind of shake look. You can put it on Z radial, which makes it go backwards and forward. They all look very cool. Spherical, I guess, kind of cool. But yeah, it makes it look almost liquidy. I'm going to keep the effect at Y radial. I think it looks the best, and we're going to want to tweak a lot of these values. So for the first size, we're going to just want to type in like 1,000,000, however far it will go. Okay? So that's for the first size. For the second size, I'm going to put it at 200, which is basically going to make it so it doesn't go up and down quite as much. And once this text starts expanding, so we're going to want it to, the effect of the shaking to completely be gone by about frame 130 or 140. So at 140, we're going to type in 0 for this middle value right here. Everything else stays the same, and we're just going to click the keyframe button. Alright? And now we're going to go to frame 30 or something, 1 second into the animation, or you can try 60, whatever looks better, and we're just going to type in 200, and we're going to keyframe that. So let's play our animation now and see how sick it looks. And if you don't want to be distracted by these circles and these lines, what you can do is first dot on the right next to each of these effects, click it twice so it turns red. And that's just going to make it so it's hidden by camera. You can also do this to the plane, but it still works in the renderer. Alright, so not hidden by camera, I meant hidden by the editor, so we don't see it in this editor view, but it still does render in the camera. So let's watch this animation. Alright, so you can see that definitely looks very, very cool. We have this cool kind of shaking and buckling animation at the beginning, making it look like it's almost not a solid, and then it transforms. I don't know quite what it's going to be, but it forms into this text, and I just let it sit still for these last couple seconds. Let's get a render right here and see how this looks. But again, guys, to make this look top notch, definitely gonna want to add the Real Smart motion blur. If you have it, it makes it look 1,000,000 times better. It makes it look realistic. And you're also gonna want to add maybe a blue color correction, which came naturally when I added the lens flares above it. And I also added a blue glow effect, and on top of that I added a glow effect that was barely visible with a little bit of vertical glow, which I actually do on a lot of my intros. It's one of the effects I really like. But let's just play this animation one final time before I say bye to you guys. So yeah, that looks pretty cool. If you guys found this tutorial helpful, please like the video. That'll inspire me to make more awesome tutorials. And yeah, guys, that's about it. Thanks for watching.